Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about novice lifters and metabolic conditioning work, or just conditioning work in general. And I was kind of prompted to do this video because I was looking through the Q&As, and I'll probably address it separately, and I don't know what days are going to come out separately as far as me getting this up there. But someone had asked me, hey, Mark Ripto says that he doesn't like novices doing conditioning work because it stalls their progress. And while I think that's a valid point, there's some things to consider here. And it's that general physical preparedness and conditioning can actually prepare you for weightlifting and get you in shape in general. And what I mean by that is that plenty of athletes historically, and I think this is something that Louis Simmons has brought up, that the Russian coaches way back during the Cold War days in the Soviet era, they actually took all their athletes and ran them through a large background of general physical preparedness before they put them into any sport, including weightlifting, and it tended to be very, very successful. And by that same token, this is also something that when you look at it, a lot of people who go do something like CrossFit, which is based entirely upon Metcon, that's what their whole training is based around, random metabolic conditioning work, or GPP, general physical preparedness. And then if they choose to go into lifting, they do great. I have a family member who did CrossFit and then walked in and started doing powerlifting and broke an American squat record within 3 years of getting under a real barbell. So the point there is that the GPP work can absolutely build your base to do that. So the point we come over to is, why would someone like Ripito say that? Well, his definition of a novice is different from most of ours. So that's the problem we run into. I define a novice as anyone like below an acceptable strength level who can still make any form of linear progression. But with Mark, it's basically you're no longer a novice the moment you can't make linear progression at all. In other words, if you can't add weight to the squat every single week, you're no longer a novice, right? In his case, they almost defined it as every session. So basically, every time you go to the gym, if you don't add more weight to the bar successfully, you're not a novice in their opinion. That's a bit different than other people have. So in other words, their idea of linear progression doesn't mean slow linear progression. It means, are you literally stronger every single week than you were the week before? You're still a novice if you're capable of doing that. And the moment you stall on anything, you're not a novice, right? Time to adjust programming is more or less their stance. So from that perspective, he's right, but how long of a time period is that? And it's not to say that novices shouldn't do conditioning. It's that maybe early in your first real strength program, if you aren't conditioned already, maybe you shouldn't be adding conditioning work in. That's the point. In other words, if you are very, very weak and you're starting out, and we just need to get you as strong as possible, as quickly as possible, it's not unreasonable to say, hey, for a couple of months, we're not going to do any conditioning. If you don't do it already and you're not in shape, why? Because strength is the highest priority. And I'm telling you guys that as someone who does conditioning work pretty much 5 to 7 days a week, in one manner or another. Some of those, it's much lighter than others. But as far as real conditioning work, at least 3 days a week. All right, I place a high value on metabolic conditioning right now. Strength is the higher priority. State that again. As someone who uses large amounts of metabolic conditioning and feel that it's part of my current model for success, it is still a secondary training stimulus. Strength is the single most important performance element for every goal. All right? I don't want that to be made perfectly clear. Maximizing strength is the most important performance element. I don't care if you're going to go do physique stuff later. I don't care if you're going to be a power lifter, a football player, marathon runner. I'm talking about even endurance athletes. We know that endurance athletes who build a strength base do better. Or if your goal is general health and fitness, strength is a higher priority. And even the medical research on that, the medical literature, when it's actually studied, very clearly shows that. If you had to pick only one thing to train for, which thing is going to give you the longest quality of life? What one thing staves off the most medical conditions out of any form of exercise, anything that focuses it upon strength. Strength is the single most important thing. And there's a lot of reasons for that. That almost needs to be its own multiple videos again as to specifically why that is, why it staves off aging, why it prevents all of these health problems, and it is way more valuable than cardio for that, or conditioning work. With the added caveat, in the best of both worlds, you'd have both. In an ideal scenario for that, you would have both. But we need to make that clear. Strength is the higher priority even for health. When I say strength, I don't mean these weird misconceptions that the bodybuilding and physique world has about strength. That, strength just means you get really fat and do 1 rep maxes. Okay, that's not what we're talking about. That's a complete straw man argument. Talking about your actual training itself. Building strength, highest priority. So when you take a novice lifter, if they're unconditioned, the actual strength training will build their conditioning to some extent. In other words, if we increase your squat, if we double your squat as an untrained person, your endurance and conditioning is actually going to improve off of that alone. Your work capacity and your cardiovascular conditioning is all going to increase slightly, literally off of doing nothing but doubling your squat strength. I mean, we could take everything else out and just make you squat and get stronger on the squat and focus on the squat, and your conditioning will improve if you're completely untrained. If we do extra conditioning work, it may slow how quickly we can get to doubling your squat strength, right? So that's the point there with that. But let's come over to our other situation. If you're already conditioned to continue to do conditioning work, will not hurt your novice gains at all. So if someone already has a base of metabolic conditioning and they're not doing excessive amounts of it, and we go put them under a barbell, they'll excel just fine without cutting it out. So it's a question we get into of how conditioned were you already when you started. If you're already in shape, and by in shape we mean the classic scientific and sports science definition, which means good cardiovascular conditioning, which is not the same as the endurance work. It is not the same. The good conditioning means you're in shape. If you're already conditioned, it's fine. So here's the other thing. Would I even cut it out for a short phase for the new person who needs to make some quick linear progress? Of course. Of course. But would I also, for some people who are still in what I would consider a novice phase, my definition, would I add metabolic conditioning back in on them? Sure I would. Because if it's done appropriately, it has a hypertrophic stimulus. Because look at the stuff I'm doing even here. This is Metcon work. This is conditioning work. You don't think there's any hypertrophy happening as a result of it? If you do a lot of it, sure there is. What else does it do? It enhances recovery. If you're in better shape, you recover better from your real training. Your work capacity is higher, your recovery is better. Now the downside is that when you first add some of this in, you will take a hit in your training response to the other, because you're going to have to adapt to it. And because you're not conditioned as conditioned yet, you're not getting the downstream benefits that are coming up of being more conditioned. You don't develop the ability to recover faster 1 week into your conditioning work. It takes weeks. It could take months. So, hypothetically, could it slow gains at first? Yes, absolutely. So you've got to be careful when you add it in. You have to be careful when you add it in. But should novices still, on some of my programs you've already started, should they start adding metabolic conditioning? Absolutely. Absolutely. But I would say it's usually probably you shouldn't be doing it when you're at a point to where you're adding 5 pounds every single session to your squat successfully. That would not be the ideal time to do it. Maybe after your first reset. Maybe after your first weight reset on your big lifts. That could be a good time to add it in. It could be a real good time to add it in. Alright guys, well that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.